So welcome to Men's Theology Forum. It's a little early in the month, but just to give you kind of an overview of what we are and what we do, Men's Theology Forum exists to spur on godly discussion on topics related to Christian theology, typically of the Reformed persuasion. And tonight we have Jared McNabb. Jared is a husband, father of 3 boys, preschool age and younger. He received his bachelor's from Lancaster Bible College and an MDiv from Westminster Theological Seminary. Jared is a minister at St. Paul's Church in Manchester, Maryland, and he tutors in rhetoric at Christiana Academy in Westminster, Maryland. So his passions include theology of all stripes, cooking, gardening, and household economics. And he firmly believes that the game of baseball is one of the greatest fruits of Christendom. So don't hold that against him. So the format tonight is the same as every month that we have this. So we'll have a lecture by the speaker. We'll have about 5-10 minutes of a brief break, grab a drink, use the restroom, whatever you need to do. And then we'll have a time of Q&A afterward, and to grill Jared, or ask any questions you have. But that will last usually around 30 minutes, and then it'll open up to general discussion and hanging out and wasting a bunch of Peter's time. So if you'd like, I can go ahead and pray and we can get started. Father in heaven, thank you for allowing us to meet together again this month. I pray during the season of Advent and coming up during the season of Christmas, I pray that we will take and heed Jared's words today, examine them and see what your word says about materialism, what your word says about gifts and giving. And I pray that as we move on to our daily lives, we can take whatever we glean from the scriptures from Jared and use it for the edification of the body. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.
All right, well, I'm really excited to be here and to talk about this important topic. As Lucas said, I tutor in rhetoric, and that is the art of how to persuade people of your position. And Aristotle says that your character, your ethos, is the most important thing. He says, ethos, almost all persuasion, if people like you, if they find you credible, then they will find your message believable. So because of that, I came bearing gifts. Now this is my ethos for tonight. This is a smoked beer, also called a bacon beer, and it tastes just like liquid bacon. And so if you're not convinced that materialism, Christian materialism, is a good thing by my talk, then we will share this and you will be persuaded. So every year around this time, there's a war on Christmas, right? We all hear about that war on Christmas, but the one I'm talking about is not the one where supposedly Christians get really upset about Starbucks holiday cups, all right? That imaginary war that people think Christians actually care about what Starbucks puts on their cups. It's not the war on Christmas that President Trump has declared victory and we can now say boldly, Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. Rather, the war on Christmas that I'm talking about is a war that Christians are often on the front lines of engaging. Christians themselves are often attacking Christmas, declaring war on Christmas in this way. And then there's the war against Christmas materialism, right? Christmas materialism. It's not November anymore, so we can take some quarter and offer qualifications and nuance. Nobody got that joke. I'm not Doug Wilson, but so we're gonna hopefully kind of slow down and kind of think about what we're talking about. All right. First thing we have to ask is, what is the meaning of materialism? First off, I'm not talking about philosophical materialism, right? There's a philosophy out there that understands that the world and everything that it contains is just matter, just physicality, and that there's no mind, there's no spirit, there's no soul, there's no God. It's just pure scientism. So we can explain everything in terms of biology, in terms of chemistry, in terms of physics, right? That's philosophical materialism, and I have no desire whatsoever to defend that. It is, besides being anti-Christian, it's quite a silly philosophy. But rather, I'm talking about materialism in a more colloquial, common usage of this term. All right. So in this way, materialism is a love of things. All right. We think of Christmas, a love of things, or rather, materialism as the acquiring of stuff. Acquiring of stuff. Oftentimes we think of materialism, you might think of the need to keep up with the Joneses, right? That kind of thing. So materialism in the sense of enjoying, loving, acquiring things, stuff, especially, we think about a lot around Christmas. And so this time of year, discussions about the materialistic overthrow of Christmas becomes ubiquitous. This is outside of Christian culture. We often, think of our popular movies or popular, especially movies. You think, Christmas is all about getting. Miracle on 34th Street. There's a lot of isms in the world. The worst is commercialism and how they kind of flipped it on its head. You think of Charlie Brown, right? He gets all depressed because Christmas is just about trees and cards that he doesn't get. And he wanted to know the real meaning of Christmas. Right? I think Charlie Brown says Christmas is just a commercial and corporate racket. Right? Here's one person who wrote this article, How I Reinvented the Patriarchal Consumerist Holiday That Is Christmas. And this is what she said. She said, Christmas is all about waste, glut, and Santa, and the shoppers shoving one another during Black Friday sales. So, and she was fighting against that by teaching her son that Christmas is about naturalism and going out into the woods and celebrating creatures. Was kind of how she fought against the materialistic Christmas. Outside of Christmas, in the general culture, I think the move towards a lifestyle of minimalism is how this shows up. I don't know if you guys have heard of this term or known people that kind of embrace this philosophy of minimalism. And there's a couple different, books that have been very popular to come out about it. A couple different kind of ways to go about it. I think one book said, you pick up an object and you look at it and you ask yourself, does this bring you joy? And if it's not into the garbage can, it goes. And so that's the one question. And then there's another book that said, the philosophy is 100 things. You should try to own no more than 100 things. All right? So no matter, whatever you fill your house with, no more than 100 objects should be in your life. And you can declutter and you can bring peace of mind. And, a lot of millennials kind of do this so that they can travel. Right? They have less stuff so that they can go overseas and they can take all the cool vacations that they want. But it's this kind of this idea that getting and accumulating and stuff is bad, and simplicity of lifestyle in this way is better. We come to Christians, critique take on a little bit different tone. Right, in the Christian circles, materialism in Christmas, the idea is that materialism of Christmas overshadows the spiritual. Right, so Christmas has this immense spiritual truth, and the Christmas trees, the presents, the Santa, everything else overshadows that and keeps us from experiencing of worshiping right. It keeps us from fully entering into the spirituality that Christmas should kind of bring to the Christian. And we fail to enter into the spiritual nature of it because of the trappings that we see right behind me. right? We make Christmas more about giving and getting rather than about Jesus. You know, so you might hear preachers or bloggers say, what are your kids most excited about? Jesus or presents, right? Jesus or presents. What are your kids most excited about? And then the other thing that's pretty prevalent in Christian circles is that the Santa myth is more prevalent than the nativity story, right? So what are Christians or children, what are your children Christians, what are they more excited about? The story of Christmas, about Jesus' nativity, about God becoming flesh, or about this imaginary man who lives in the North Pole who comes through your chimney and delivers presents? What more gets your kids excited? What more captures their attention, right? And so, you know, not all of these criticisms are bad, right? We should, you know, hopefully our children's minds are more shaped by the nativity, but I'm just giving you a flavor of, you know, the common critique. The other thing that they say a lot of is, how much time do you spend buying and wrapping presents, preparing food, setting up decoration versus the time you spend reading your Bible and thinking about the spiritual aspect? How much time? You know, if you were to weigh one against the other, you know, which one weighs heavier in your scales, right? And pretty often for all of us, if we're celebrating Christmas the way most Americans do, we spend a lot more time on the food and the presents and the wrapping and the Christmas tree. One example of this is a guy who I have a lot of respect for. His name is Paul David Tripp. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. I'll just name his name. He's a guy, not a guy that I, you know, some teachers and theologians, I, you know, watch them on Facebook because I like to see a theological train wreck every once in a while. And Paul David Tripp's not that, you know, I often like what he says, but is a great example of this kind of Christian critique of materialism. And he says this, he said, we allow Christmas to be about creative stuff rather than about the incarnation of the Creator. We have turned the story on its head. The core of the story is that the Creator has become a man to rescue us from the bondage to creation. Note that. How horrible is it that Christmas has become about our own bondage to creation? It becomes more about decorating and acquiring than about being rescued. We want to decorate our lives with beautiful things we think will satisfy us, but what we've done with the story is a metaphor because these things that are so beautiful to us, they never satisfy us. So it's not wrong to want your house to be beautiful, but that's all the season's about. You've missed the point. It's not about decorating and acquiring, but it's about incarnation of the Creator from all of those false hopes that are beauty, that are acquiring, that anything else besides God can satisfy us. So he said, what should we do? We should look for ways to emphasize the spiritual over the material. This has become an obsessively materialistic time of year, but it's actually a time of spiritual warfare. So how can I point my family and myself towards the spiritual content of the season? And just one more example of this kind of critique of materialism from outside of Christmas, from a Christian perspective, is an article from Desiring God. If you guys know Desiring God, again, it's a great website with a lot of good content. But I had read this article about a year ago, I think, and it said, ask the question, how much do I love chocolate? How much do I love chocolate? And there's a girl writer, I don't have her name down here, but she said, my child hears me opening the chocolate, she can hear it, and she said, Mom, are you taking your medicine again? And I realized at that moment, chocolate had become this idol in my life that when I get stressed out, I run to chocolate, I run to the candy jar, and I get out chocolate, and chocolate becomes my savior, and it's this big idol in my heart when I should be running to God. And so she says, she concludes her article, our deepest hunger for food, love, fame, and material things can only be quenched by a stronger desire. So ask God to give you a hunger for Him more than anything else, and trust that He will satisfy you far more than another piece of chocolate cake. All right, so that's kind of the, outside of the realm of Christmas, that's, kind of a typical example of this kind of Christian critique of materialism. But here's my contention tonight. While there may be some truth in those things discussed above, I pointed out some of them, and there are some truths contained in there, at best they are one-sided. Right? At best they are one-sided truths, and at worst they are an implicit denial of biblical teaching about the goodness of creation and the goodness of the material world. I think the central issue, the real question that faces us as Christians and that we'll be asking tonight is this, is what is the Christian relationship to matter, to stuff, to things, and materialism? Is there a dichotomy or even an antithesis between spirit and matter? Right? Does the spiritual and the material, are they in war against each other, and we have to choose one rather than the other? Can we only choose one rather than the other? If we spend our Christmas focused on material things, putting up Christmas tree, wrapping presents, are we thereby going to lose all of the spiritual aspects of Christmas and even in our normal day-to-day life? What should be our relationship to things? The other questions we can ask after we kind of get those is, how can we properly celebrate Christmas? Not by avoiding or even in spite of created stuff, but precisely in and through the stuff. We can properly celebrate Christmas, and not only that, but properly live a joyful Christian life. So what I want to do to answer these questions is start where all good theology starts, and that's a good theology of creation. If you kind of have a good theology of creation, what creation is all about, then a lot of your theology will flow from that. And then we'll kind of do a little quick biblical theology. We'll talk about the Old Testament real quick, then the incarnation, the new heavens, new earth, and then we'll kind of give some more or less application. So that's kind of where we're going with the rest of the time. But when we get to the question of creation, right, the major question in philosophy and somewhat in theology is, why is there something instead of nothing, right? So we have all these atheistic scientists that say, we can understand the origins of the world. We understand the Big Bang Theory, we understand evolution, we can explain the world, right? Well, where did the world come from? Well, it came from gases. Why were those gases there? Right? Why were they there? Where did they come from? Why is there these gases that apparently started everything billions of years ago? Why were they there rather than nothing? Right? Why isn't there just an empty void? Right? That's the question that faces kind of philosophers and even somewhat Christians. Because for Christians, the question is, if God is who he said he is, right? If he is the perfect being, if he is Christians, he is a trinity of persons. So not only is he the perfect being, but he has this perfect communion of love and understanding and of persons communing throughout all eternity. Why did he then go and reach out and create? Right? So even for Christians, we have to ask this question of, why is there something? Why is there this created world instead of just God? Like, why did he reach out and create? So to understand, if we, to kind of get at this question, I think we have to take a couple steps. And the first is to understand that God has the attribute that Christians call the attribute of aseity. And that means that God is completely self-sufficient and he is self-existent, right? Nothing causes God to be. God does not depend on some prior, bigger God to exist, right? God is completely, he's a necessary being. He has to exist. He has to exist how he is, right? Nothing causes his existence. He does not depend on anything else, right? So he asked Israel, he said, do you really think, Israel, that I eat, that I delight in your sacrifices? You really think that you're giving me something that I need, right? God doesn't need anything, right? He doesn't depend on anything. He doesn't need anything besides himself and himself alone. He has no need and he has no lack. And so therefore, when he reaches out to create, he creates in this absolute freedom, right? Christians have always maintained that God did not have to create the world, right? No matter what kind of orthodox system of theology, Catholic, Protestants have always maintained that there is nothing in God that demanded that he reach out and create, right? It wasn't that God says, oh, I'm lonely, there's only 3 of us up here, I want to create people so that I'm not so lonely. And it wasn't that, I kind of need some self-worth, or, there's all these kind of reasons why people make up a Christian theology has always said that creation was an act of God's sovereign and free will. That apart from creation, that before creation, God was God, and he needed nothing, and he gained nothing in creation. So, what moved God to create? Why did God create this universe? Right? Some Christians have said that it was his goodness, right? That God existed in this trinity of persons, and he had overflowed with goodness, and so through his goodness, he desired to be goodness to humans made in his image and created for that reason. Even Tertullian, church father, said, God made the world not for himself, but for man, so that he can bestow his goodness upon man. Problem with that is that man becomes the end point, the purpose of creation, right? Man is the highest point of creation, and creation serves him and him alone, right? And the Bible does not speak in that way. The Bible never speaks that man is the end or the goal of creation, that God is only the means to achieve that end, right? So that, that sounds good, that God created out of his goodness, but that's not quite biblical, right? Creation displays God's goodness. Creation is the way he created was a result of his goodness, but there's something else that caused him to create. Let me just read this here. Theologian said, Herman Bavinck said that God is the all-good being. He is perfect love. He is total blessedness within himself. And therefore he doesn't need to bring his goodness or his love to maturity any more than he needs to bring his self-consciousness to maturity. So it wasn't that God was potentially good or he had a little bit of goodness and he wanted to overflow, but God, even before creation, was perfectly good, and that's not the reason he needed to create. So again, why is there something instead of nothing? Why has God created? Well, Romans 11:36 said, for from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. To him be the glory forever. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. Right? And there's all sorts of other verses you can think of them that God's glory, that God receiving glory, is the purpose of creation. Right? That God created the world in order to glorify himself through this creation. He created human beings in order to bring glory to himself. He created rocks, streams, the sky to declare and praise his glory. And then Psalm 104 speaks of this. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. So we see glory and delight. Glory and delight. And those things go together. When God sees his creation glorifying him, when he sees the works of his hand glorifying him, what does he do? He rejoices in that. He delights in that. He delights to see his creation glorifying him. It makes his, God was speaking properly, you can say it makes his heart well up to see his creation glorifying him, and he delights in his creation. So why did God create the world? Why is there something rather than nothing? To glorify God, and because God delights in it. Right? God delights. He takes joy in his created world. So why did he create, let's get really specific. Why did he create this specific world? Right? He could have created this kind of spiritual realm, right? God is a spirit. He doesn't have a body. There's no matter in him. There's no physicality of him. He could have made a world in which reflected that. He could have made this spiritual world in which we're all just kind of minds or spirits somehow interacting with each other without this kind of body, flesh, blood, and bone. Why did he not create that? Why did he create this world full of matter and stuff, dirt and grass, sky and sea? Why? Because he delights in it. Because he delights in it. Right? When I was I preached through Genesis recently, and I discovered that there are 2 million, estimated 2 million sea species that remain in total mystery. Right? Scientists say we can identify about 200,000, 240,000 sea creatures, and we estimate that about 2 million we have no idea. Right? There are 2 million different varieties of sea creatures that exist out there that we can't look at, we can't study, we can't identify them. We just have to guess. You know, the ocean's just that vast. So why did God create all those sea creatures in which we don't even know about? Right? Why did he do that? Why did he create dinosaurs that we no longer see today? Why did he create millions of rocks that are buried under our soil? Why does he create microscopic organisms that eat organic matter in our soil? And simply that existing as a wonderful, unique diversity of creation, when we see these rocks and trees and see about these mysterious sea creatures, we understand that in all their diversity, they are glorifying God, who is the wise and good creator, and he is delighting in it. Now, one theologian, Matthew Levering, says that nothing in this world, including rocks, is cosmic waste. Nothing in this world is meaningless, but all creation displays God's wisdom and the goodness of God. He said that the infinite wisdom and goodness of the Creator God are apparent in each and every created thing, none of which is absurd, none of which fails to manifest God, if only we know how to look rightly. So why does God create this world? Because he delights in it. Get really particular. Why did God create this world with colors? Right? Because he delights in it and it glorifies him. Why did God create grapes? Right? Grapes are a miracle. That they have this sugar on the inside and these living yeast on the outside, and just smash them together and let them sit for a while, it becomes wine. Right? Why would God create that grape? And why would this wine not only be delicious, right, but why would it have that rich mahogany red color? Right? When you swirl in the glass, it's just beautiful because he delights in it and it glorifies him. Right? Why did God create this odd creature, the cow, right? Which not only gives milk to its young, but its milk is delicious, and its milk has this stuff on top that if we beat it up, it gives us butter, right? Because it glorifies God and he delights in it. Why did God place gold and silver and iron in the ground for human beings to dig up and turn it into jewelry or decorations or tools? Because he delights in it and it glorifies him, and he loves to see his creatures go to work on those items. So all of this glorifies God. All of the creation reflects his wisdom and goodness, and he delights in it. Again, Psalm 104, may the Lord rejoice in his work. And Lord, rejoice in his works. That's kind of the theology of creation. That creation is good, and God delights and takes joy in it. Now quickly, when we get, we kind of go through the Old Testament, no one can read the Old Testament, I don't think. Anyone can read the Old Testament and think that the Bible is all about emphasizing a spiritual inner realm over the material realm. That there's some kind of spiritual realm in which God is emphasizing over the material created world. Now, there is a spiritual realm in the Bible. The Old Testament clearly states that. But these two things, to read the Old Testament, is not in conflict. Right? When God gives instructions on how to build the temple, it's full of material things. When God gives his people instructions on how to worship him, it's all about blood. It's all about meat. right? It's all about eating and drinking, and there's no kind of antithesis that we can see there. We'll talk about Genesis 3 in a minute. And then we can think about the incarnation, right? The incarnation. What happened in the incarnation? The Creator becomes a creature, right? Without losing anything that is of himself, without losing anything of his godness, he becomes a creature. He becomes, as Paul Tripp said, he becomes created stuff, right? He becomes flesh and bones. He becomes blood. He becomes a man with hair and a beard, right? That is the incarnation, that the God who is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable, becomes material, if you will. And apparently, the God who became incarnated apparently enjoyed material things, right? Apparently he enjoyed material things so much that his enemies were saying, look at him, he's eating and drinking, so he is a drunkard and a glutton, right? So Jesus obviously wasn't a sinner, but there was something about his lifestyle that the people could point to and say, you're stepping over a bound. What are they telling Jesus at that point? They're telling him, hey, you're emphasizing the material over the spiritual. All right, that's what they're telling him at that point. But then he said, well, John the Baptist came doing none of those things, and you didn't like him either, so you're impossible to please. And so we can think about, we think about creation. God declares it good, and he takes delight in it, and then he became creation himself. And then we can look forward to what is coming ahead, to the new heavens and new earth, which is going to be physical existence. Going to be a physical existence, right? The idea that we go to heaven in this kind of spiritual realm where we float around as angels is not biblical. And how do we know that? Very simple is that Jesus' physical body was resurrected. Jesus in his physical body and his full humanity ascended into heaven. Think about this, guys. There is created stuff sitting at the right hand of God at this moment. Right? There's a man with flesh and blood and hair sitting at the right hand of God at this moment. Right? And so what we see at the end of Revelation, we don't see this kind of spiritual existence where finally we can escape material world, but rather we see heaven doing what? Heavenly Jerusalem come down and join with earth and create this kind of new world existence where heaven and earth are no longer separated like Genesis 1:1, where God created the heavens and the earth, but now these things have now merged together. And so we will, the resurrection hope that we have is a physical hope, right? The Christian hope is not some kind of, we're spiritually resurrected because our spirits leave our bodies. No, it's just in the same. Jesus is our first fruits, right? He's the first fruits. He's the guarantee of what is ahead. And so that guarantee is that we will rise just like Jesus, that our bodies will come out of the grave just like Jesus, and they will be perfected just like Jesus, and we will be perfected when we see him as he is. And so we are taking material world into the new heavens and new earth. One of my favorite writers says this, kind of thinking about this age to come. He said, the beauty of this age is to make us eager and to make us long for the beauty of the age to come. All right? So the analogy that I thought of is the Lord's Supper. Right? The Lord's Supper should never make us full. It should never satisfy us in that way of, I don't want any more. Right? The Lord's Supper strengthens us, but what does it also do? It strengthens us by strengthening our appetite for what's ahead. Right? Now we get this little bit of bread and wine, but what is ahead? Well, what is ahead is that marriage supper of the Lamb. Right? And so that beauty of the Lord's Supper, the grace that we get in the Lord's Supper is not grace that we simply rest and satisfy us, but it is a grace that strengthens us to look forward and to yearn for what is to come. And so this world is good and wonderful and beautiful and awe-inspiring, and we can love it, but we also love it because of what it will become. Because of what it will become. Again, Robert Capon says that half of the world's gorgeousness lies hidden in the glimpsed city it longed to become. For all of its rooted loveliness of creation, the world has no continuing city here, but it's rather on the way to become a better version of itself. And it is our glory to see it so and to thirst for it until Jerusalem comes down at last. We are given appetite not to consume the world and simply to forget it, but to taste its goodness and to hunger to make it come. Hunger to make it great. And so we see that in creation, in the Old Testament, in the incarnation, and in the life of the world to come, what do we see? The goodness of the material world, the goodness of physicality, the goodness of stuff, you might say. So that's kind of the biblical theology. I want to take a minute and do some applicational kind of things. Well, first one, kind of a theological point, but the question is, spirituality and materialism, right? So the idea often is that material world, the unspoken opinion, the unspoken kind of idea is that the material world is somehow sinful, or at least less than ideal. But where does sin reside, right? Does sin reside in stuff, or does sin reside in the human heart, right? Now, even it's fascinating, John Calvin in his discussion of Genesis 3 talked about what it means that the woman saw that the fruit was good, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? God just said, don't eat it, right? There's nothing inherently sinful about the fruit, but God said, don't eat it, so desiring it and eating of it was sinful, but the sin wasn't in the stuff, right? So what happened when she saw? John Calvin says that this impure look at Eve is already infected with the poison of a changed heart. And so that was, and this impure look was both the messenger and the witness of her impure heart. Previously, she could have looked at the tree with sincerity and have no desire to eat of it. It would not affect her mind, for she had faith in the word of God. But now now after the heart had declined from faith and from obedience to the word of God, she corrupted herself in all her senses, and depravity was diffused throughout all parts of her soul as well as her body. This is interesting. So for John Calvin, the moment of sin wasn't when Eve grabbed the fruit and took it, but it was rather when she saw that it was good, right? She saw that it was good. It was at that moment where she, not that the fruit itself was sinful, but at that moment she declined from faith, that she left faith, that she desired to disobey God's word instead of continuing to believe God. And so we see there, even in Genesis 3, we often think, oh, they ate the fruit and that was a sin. But even before that, she had entered into this realm of wickedness, this realm of sin inside, which then leads to outer action. And of course, Jesus backs this up, right? He talks about that what flows out of man is simply the result of his heart. And so sin doesn't reside in stuff. Sin doesn't reside in the outer world, but it rather resides in our hearts, and it affects how we do outside stuff, right? It doesn't just stay in our heart, but it moves out as we move out into the world with these sinful hearts and sinful desires and desire to please ourselves. But we have to remember that the sin is here and has effects on the outer world. Sin is never, inanimate objects do not have sin residing inside of them. And so what is what does sin do? Well, one of the primary things a sin does is that it disorders our loves, right? What are what is, the summary of the law? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then other loves flow from that and are lesser than that. But what sin does, it disorders our loves, and so we love ourselves first, right? We love pleasing ourselves. We love serving ourselves. We love basically what all sin comes down to is the desire to serve yourself in some way that is contrary to God's command. And so sin disorders our love. And according to St. Augustine, virtue, what a Christian should be seeking, is to have your affections, to have your loves according to the kind of degree which is appropriate to it. So God deserves our highest love. Our neighbors deserve our secondary love, flowing out from that love of God. Of course, when we break down neighbors, your wife deserves a very specific love. Your children deserve a very specific love. Your neighbor next door deserves a very specific love. And then moving out from there, things deserve your specific love. And so virtue is kind of ordering these loves in the right way. And so we need to train our affections, we need to train our hearts to love the right things in the right way. We need to train our heart, train our affection to love the right things in the right way. So we need to put all of our our full love, our full devotion upon our triune God. But then coming to love him the way we should, coming to know him the way we should, as a loving Father, as a good and wise Creator, as a Creator who looks upon his creation and says it is good, then we can begin to love the things that he loves and delights in what he delights in. So there's lots of things we can say to that, but getting to the point, we can receive matter, we can receive the stuff and the things of our life as good gifts from a good Father and a wise Creator. Right? So going back to that quote from Paul Tripp, the Bible nowhere talks about us, that I know of, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that we are in bondage to creation. Right? We're not bonded to creation, we're bonded to our own sin, we're bonded to our own hearts. Right? Christ doesn't come to free us from bondage to creation, but why? Well, creation, according to Romans 8, doesn't bondage us, doesn't keep us down, but creation is also groaning for that same redemption that we are groaning for. Creation joins along with us. We're waiting for our redemption as bodies, as we're waiting to receive our full adoption as sons. What is creation doing? It's not holding us down, it's also saying, me too. Me too. I want to be redeemed. I've been cursed by God. When humans sinned, God came down and cursed me, and I am looking forward to not only having that curse lifted, but also being joined up to heaven in that kind of new realm, to becoming not just what I was back in the garden, but to what I was supposed to be, this kind of heavenly, earthly city. So where does sin reside in us? And we have to, by God's grace, reorder our hearts and our affections. One thing I want to talk about quickly is materialism in our job, specifically as men, husbands, and fathers. Again, Robert Capon says this in his book, Bed and Board. He said, we need to work up a Christian materialism, and nowhere do we need it more than in the home. Marriage and family life are practically an intuition in matter. The world of the household is one continuum of things: bed and board, food and drink, runny noses, and soggy diapers are all inescapable for us. And so I think as men specifically, we need to take seriously the materiality of ourselves and our calling as men and fathers and husbands. Right? So on Wednesday this week, I was working on this, and my wife called me that she had a flat tire. She was about 10 minutes down the road, and she called me, and she had a flat tire, and so I went up, and it took a lot of the rest of the day to get that thing changed. I had to get a new tire. It didn't take me the rest of the day to change the tire. It took me a few minutes to change the tire, then I had to go and get a whole new tire. So, just clarifying. But, my thought was, what if I said, Kendra is my wife's name, Kendra, a relationship's supposed to be based on love, and you keep making it about material things. Right? You keep wanting to bring these material aspects into our relationship, but it's supposed to be about love. It's supposed to be about something higher than material ways in which I can help you. Right? What would that have done? We don't have to go there. We'll have to go there. But our goal as husbands and fathers and men generally is very much based on serving our wife and our children in material ways. And that's no less important than serving them in our spiritual leadership. And so that's why I said earlier, that's why I think that trend of minimalism that we talked about at the beginning as a philosophy of life is rooted in anti-Christian and anti-family ideas. Right? The idea of owning 100 things. Try doing that with children, right? What do children need? They need books, they need toys, they need crayons, paper to color on, diapers, onesies, burp cloth, baseballs, tire swing, bikes, right? Those things are all the things that children just kind of need to be children, right? And then, what happens, so not just serving your children, but also living a good Christian life the way the Bible tells you to, right? I remember I read one article that said, you only drink out of one coffee cup. Why would you ever need a whole cupboard with coffee cups? You're only going to drink out of one at a time, just have one coffee cup, get rid of the rest. Well, the Bible commands us to be hospitable. In our culture, that means offering someone a cup of coffee when they come over, and generally not drinking out of the same cup, right? And so this idea of minimalism can often be antithetical to the way we're supposed to live as man, husband, fathers, and just generally as Christians, right? It can often get in the way of being hospitable in the way that we're supposed to be. It's also very much based in a kind of posh, upper middle class idea because poor people can't get rid of things that they might need a year down the line, right? So it's a very kind of upper middle class idea. I'm almost out of time. I don't know.
No, you're not.
Real quick, I wanted to talk real quick to criticism before we get to Q&A. Right, so one person could tell me, well, the Bible says not to love the world, right? If you're going to bring one chapter at me to critique everything that I just said, I would suggest 1 John 2, right? 1 John 2 is, very much do not love the world, right? John harps that. Do not love the world. Do not love the things of this world. Loving the things of this world is antithetical to loving God and to loving Jesus. So do not love things of the world. Well, how do I answer that? I think it's pretty clear there that the world is not God's created world. Not the world is God's good creation, but the world in John's usage that is sinful. The world that is in John's usage more of like a cultural world. Do not love the anti-Christ, the anti-Christian culture that exists around you. I think that's his usage of the world. Not simply, don't love God's created world, but don't love the world that is run, that is by sinful men with sinful desires, pushing sinful things upon people. Right? So in our world, it's okay to, you can enjoy relations with your wife, right? That is God's good creation. You can enjoy that. That is not part of the world that John is telling us not to love. But we're not to love the things of this world. We're not to love pornography. We're not to love any of the sexual things that our world sends at us. So I think that John's usage is that kind of, sinful cultural thing we're not to love. We're not to desire the things that are anti-God that the world so often holds out to us. Right? The physical goodness of God's world that I'm talking about is different and separate than that. And this is where I'll end here. You might say, yes, but you can't take it with you. Right? Yes, but you can't take it with you. There's no, what do they say? You never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul, right? The ancient pharaohs were buried with all their stuff, thinking they could use in the afterlife, but you can't take it with you. And I want to say, yes, but, and that's what I'll end with. What do we take with us? Right? What are we going to take with us to the new heavens and new earth? Take ourselves and the things done for Christ. And so we hope that in God's grace our families go with us. And so think about it. What does go with us? Right? By God's grace, our wife will go with us. And what do they take? They will take a love for Christ that was formed as you show her a reflection of Christ's love in 1,000 material ways. From tire fixes to plumbing, from flowers to being a financial provider. By loving yourself, by loving your wife in this material way, she is learning of that love that Christ has for his bride. And so laying down your life, as Paul commands us, God commands us in Scripture, not only spiritual ways, but in material ways. Think about your children. What will they take with them as they enter into the new heavens and new earth with you by God's grace? Well, they will take a delight in the incarnation of Jesus Christ that began as you sat in front of the fireplace, in front of the Christmas tree, drinking eggnogs and singing songs about our God who became flesh. Right? A delight in the incarnation that was formed by unwrapping a nativity set, that wooden, earthy nativity set, and placing it somewhere where they can gaze at it and remember the Christmas story. They will take with them an understanding of the goodness and benevolence of God our Father that was demonstrated to them in a small way on Christmas morning as they opened up gifts that were lovingly bought, made, or created by their earthly Father. Right? But they will take with them a thankfulness, a heart of thankfulness for God their Father that was rehearsed and ingrained with them, not only in the Lord's Supper, right, but also year by year around roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and pie. They will take with them a faith that was ingrained in conversation in the garden, around the dinner table, washing dishes, right? They will take with them a resurrected body that was sustained by food and drink, clothes, and a warm home. They will take with them minds that were formed by books and stories. They will take with them muscles and personalities that were formed in play with all the created stuff in their life. So, in one sense, we do take this stuff with us as we enter the new heavens and new earth.